Okay, a little Chuck Berry there to get our spirits going. Welcome, everyone. As we get started, I see a lot of people still coming online. Um, we're going to do a little bit of housekeeping. So, welcome again. Thank you all for joining us on this Thursday. We have a lot to cover, so let me get started. My name is Cornelia Dorman, and I bring you greetings on behalf of the Emory Alzheimer's Disease Research Center. Today we have a full lineup for you. Our topic today is Minority Mental Health Matters. And so today you're going to be hearing information about Alzheimer's risk factors, interventions that address incidence and prevalence around memory loss. We're also going to talk about managing your household during our current pandemic and sort of what are those financial implications for people of color. We're also going to talk about your mental health and give you some very basic resources that you can address. And let me take care of this really quickly, that you can cover and address while we're dealing with this pandemic. And so as this development around the pandemic has unfolded, we're in a crisis, and we just really want to be a voice of reassurance for you at this time. Not only have we seen, we've become the epicenter here in the United States, but we've seen people of color disproportionately impacted by this disease. And so right now, we just want to be a resource. We want to avail ourselves to the public. And if you have questions during this time, please know that we are recording this session and we will repost. The other thing is, if you didn't enter your email address correctly, you probably didn't get a confirmation, or if someone's wondering what's going on, we did have a lot of bounce back. So I just want to make sure that when you're entering your email address to register, that you're entering it correctly, okay? And if you're having any technical issues, you can text Shanita Thigpen at 678-215-1961. And so as we begin, so today you're going to hear from Dr. Monica Parker. She's our medical director for the Minority Engagement Corps with the Goizueta Alzheimer's Disease Research Center. And then you're going to hear from Dr. Clinton Dye. He is a consultant to our Minority Engagement Corps. Then you'll hear from Dr. Glenda Rand Gordon, and she's the Chief Medical Officer of 180 Health Partners. And then we will close out with Alice Mullins. She's our licensed clinical social worker at the Emory Cognitive Neurology Program. So we're going to try to cover a lot of content in a short amount of time. I want you to take notes, call a friend, tell them to join us. We're getting ready to start. The PowerPoints and all the information and the resources will be available. So that's why it's really important that we have a correct email address for you. And if you didn't get it, you can again text that number and say, this is my email address. Make sure I'm included, because we're going to send PDFs of all of the information that we referenced today. So without further ado, I am going to unmute Dr. Parker. You can go ahead and unmute your line, and I'm going to pull up your PowerPoint. So bear with me while I do that.
Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us on this webinar today. For those of you who may be unfamiliar with who we are and what we do, we are responsible for the recruitment, and I did say recruitment, of persons of color for participation in neurologic research studies here at the Emory Goizueta Alzheimer's Disease Research Center. We want you, as a healthy, older person of color, whether you're African American, Latin American, Asian American, or Native American, to participate in longitudinal studies for your health, whether that has to do with Alzheimer's or any other kind of chronic disease. Why is that important? Because a lot of the treatments, the therapies, and diagnostic modalities that are used to evaluate, diagnose, and otherwise manage chronic diseases were developed without the input of people of color. So about 10 years ago, Dr. James Law, Dr. Alan Levy, and a number of other people here in the Department of Neurology wanted to increase the number of minority persons participating in research here. And it's sort of like, well, why don't they participate, Monica? Well, one of the reasons people of color don't participate in research is, first of all, they don't know anything about it. They don't know where it's really taking place. And most investigators didn't really spend a lot of time informing the population that they were interested in about what the opportunities are. So I want you to participate in clinical research for any chronic disease simply because, number one, you become more informed about whatever ailment or illness it is that's being studied. You become more knowledgeable about what is required of you as a patient or a caregiver for somebody who is a patient, and learn more about what you need to do. Here at the Goizueta Alzheimer's Disease Research Center, we appreciate that people have a number of difficulties and barriers to research participation. I'm a primary care physician or a family physician who has taken care of and continues to manage the primary care needs of older adults 60 and above. I'm a family physician, so I do everybody, but most of my work in the last 20 years or so has been concentrated on older adults. I see clinical research participation as a way to improve and otherwise gain greater access to better health care. Simply because you're more informed, you're educated, and when there's something wrong, people will talk to you about how you can get that addressed. So here in the Minority Engagement Corps, in addition to promoting research that we do here, we like to inform our research participants about what is healthy aging, what are some of the resources that you can access to help you manage whatever it is you need to manage in caregiving for a family member who might have dementia. Why? Because we've learned over time that people can't participate in research if their basic needs aren't being met. Right now in the era of COVID, many of our caregivers are home because they may be on furlough, job furloughs. Maybe they don't have enough resources to help take care of their family members at home. And our job here is to help outline and provide you access or information about resources that you can access so that you can get your needs addressed. We can't solve everything for you, but along the way, we'd like to secure your trust and your participation in research here for Alzheimer's. Now, if you've ever participated in any of our calls before, we've given you a couple of definitions about what Alzheimer's and dementia is. And the most important thing you need to appreciate, and the slide in front of you shows a map of where the heaviest rates of dementia are. Now, what is dementia? As we've discussed before, dementia is a many-splendored thing. It may be Alzheimer's related dementia. It may be a vascular or dementia related to hypertension and cholesterol. It may be Parkinson's related dementia. It may be chronic traumatic encephalopathy or head trauma induced disease. It may even be chronic alcoholism. As you look at the map in front of you, you'll see that the darkest blue is in the southeast and southwestern parts of the United States. This happens to coincide with what we call the stroke belt in the United States. This is where people are more likely to have strokes. This is where people in the United States are more likely to have heart disease. Now, why is that significant? Because, next slide, please. If you are suffering from chronic disease, you are likely to have greater risk for developing Alzheimer's or related dementia. 50% of all Medicare recipients in, certainly in the state of Georgia, have Alzheimer's or related dementia. 92% of these patients have at least one chronic disease. Most Medicare recipients, and that's people over the age of 65 who have Medicare as their primary insurance, with Alzheimer's or related dementia have at least 4 or more chronic diseases. These are the risk factors that we're going to talk about. High blood pressure, diabetes, high cholesterol, heart disease, chronic kidney disease, anemia, rheumatoid arthritis, depression, chronic obstructive pulmonary disease or lung disease, and heart failure and cardiovascular disease. So look at those different chronic diseases. If you have at least one of these, and certainly more than one of these, you're at risk for developing a type of dementia. Most commonly, you will be at risk for developing a vascular dementia. If you have vascular dementia because you have these chronic illnesses, does that mean you have Alzheimer's? Well, Alzheimer's can coexist with vascular dementia and any of the other dementias that I mentioned. Next slide, please. What are your risk factors for brain dysfunction or developing a type of dementia? I say brain dysfunction because they are all things that make your brain dysfunctional, i.e. such that your thinking is cloudy and your memory is bad, aren't related to Alzheimer's. If you have Alzheimer's, your greatest risk factors are 1, being older, i.e. older than the age of 65, your genetics. There are different chromosomes and genes that are associated with Alzheimer's development. Over 30-some genes have been targeted and noted to be associated with Alzheimer's. The most widely understood and most widely studied is something called the ApoE4 gene. In African Americans, this ApoE4 gene may also be accompanied by something called the ABCA7 gene. So in your genetic profile, if you have an ApoE4 positivity and you have the ABCA7 gene, you are likely to be at risk for Alzheimer's. If you are female, and females are at greater risk, not only because we have a tendency to live longer than men, but because there may be something in the hormonal makeup of females that predisposes us to developing Alzheimer's and a related dementia. So these first 2 items that we talked about, advanced age and genetics and gender, are generally not something that we can alter. We come here with those things. The things further down on the list: stroke and cardiovascular disease, atrial fibrillation, heart failure, hypertension, high cholesterol, untreated and poorly addressed mood disorders like depression, chronic substance abuse, chronic alcoholism, tobacco use, are things that we subject ourselves to and we have some control over. Chemotherapy, yes, there are some chemotherapeutic regimens that do result in a temporary confusion, generally known as a delirium. Certain medication interactions in older people, like being on chronic pain medicines, narcotic pain medicines, and benzodiazepines, can cause a certain kind of chemical delirium and confusion that is reversible when you stop those medications. Sleep disorders, chronic sleep apnea is associated with brain dysfunction because it's poor oxygenation of the brain. Chronic diabetes, like chronic hypertension, atrial fibrillation, and other things, puts you at risk for stroke and related disorders. And those things are impaired blood flow to the brain. Chronic thyroid disorders, either underactive or hyperactive thyroid disease. Chronic traumatic encephalopathy with head trauma because you've gotten injuries to your head. That may be a military accident. It may be chronic domestic abuse. It may be related to an athletic activity, whether it's football, soccer, boxing. And then finally, vitamin deficiencies. Vitamin deficiencies B, vitamin D deficiencies, D as in David, and folate deficiencies are associated with cognitive dysfunction. And so part of the evaluation a doctor will do is to measure vitamin B, D, and folate levels. So what are some of the things that kind of help protect your brain? Some of the things that protect your brain, and we have done studies to show that about 60 to 30% of chronic dementias can be prevented by managing lifestyle. In this, we have education. That means becoming literate such that you learn how to make good decisions, learn how to eat better, etc. That's not getting a PhD, that's not getting a doctoral degree. That is getting basic literacy such that you can make decisions for yourself. Also, increased formal training, things like music education, learning. Those are things that basically lay down neural tracks when you're younger that you can pick up later on when you need them. Exercise, moderate aerobic exercise. In aging, we recommend at least 150 minutes a week of aerobic exercise to increase blood flow and oxygenation. The use of anti-inflammatory drugs, if you have an inflammatory process going on, something like strokes, because vascular disease is an inflammatory process. People who have arthritis, anything that ends with an itis is an inflammation. So taking anti-inflammatory medications and treatments may be protective for the brain. So to protect against strokes and heart attacks, we prescribe aspirin, basic aspirin. For people who have arthritis and other musculoskeletal disorders, the anti-inflammatories that they may be placed on would be something like naproxen and ibuprofen, and also antioxidant medications and antioxidant foods, green leafy vegetables. Statins, that's the cholesterol-lowering medicines that help protect against heart disease, and protecting against heart disease prevents strokes. Red wines, because they are antioxidants, 1 or 2 glasses a day with a meal, not a whole bottle. Increasing social engagement and decreasing social isolation. As we get a little bit older, the more we socialize, the more likely we are to exercise our brain pathways and to learn about, remember people's names, and just to stay in general socially engaged so you keep your brain working. Managing hearing loss, evaluating for and getting your hearing checked on a regular basis. Just like we get our eyes checked every year, we should get our hearing checked. Treating depression. It's like, I'm not depressed, mom's not depressed, there's nothing wrong with her. Well, depression in the elderly is a very chronic condition and little recognized because people don't always pay close attention. But a lot of people who get away from their social engagements have a tendency to develop a certain amount of depression, apathy, not participating. Managing chronic diseases as well as you can. Your high blood pressure, your diabetes, your heart disease. If you have these things and you manage them well, they're less likely to cause you to develop some problem with the way your brain works. Sleep deprivation, we talk about sleep apnea and other sleep disorders, but in sleep deprivation due to sleep apnea, you have lack of oxygen to your brain. You're not getting enough oxygen to help your brain recover. But sleep is also necessary to allow your brain to heal itself. So getting enough sleep, a good solid 8 hours, not I can survive on 4, I can survive on 5, everybody's different, but getting enough sleep, restful sleep. Maintaining an ideal body weight. And how do you maintain an ideal body weight? By eating the proper foods. What kinds of foods do you need to eat? Well, for a brain health diet, we want you to follow a heart healthy diet. That can be a Mediterranean diet or a heart healthy diet. Now we have something called the MIND diet, which is a combination of the Mediterranean diet and the DASH diet, which helps the heart, but it also helps the brain. So what are some of the things that you can do right now, independent of your genetics, that will help you with your brain? Number 1, you can exercise and increase the amount of oxygenation you're getting to your brain and circulation. You can exercise to maintain an ideal body weight. You can maintain social engagement. You can get your hearing checked. And during your annual wellness visit, when you should be getting checked for depression and getting a memory screen, you screen for other diseases that need to be evaluated. You manage your chronic diseases, your high blood pressure, your diabetes, your heart disease. You get enough sleep. And if you're not getting enough sleep, you need to make an appointment to see a sleep doctor to understand why. And finally, when it comes to eating and eating habits, you know, we have myplate.gov for older people, young people, etc. But keep in mind that if you follow a Mediterranean diet, which is high in unsaturated fats like olive oil, vegetable oils, things like that, fish, poultry, less red meat, and more dark green leafy vegetables. Those are the things you can do. The diet that you should follow is a Mediterranean diet or a heart healthy diet for simplicity. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Parker. Again, we want to reiterate two things that were very resounding to me was you said manage your chronic disease, and we know people of color are disproportionately impacted by chronic disease. And so can you give us, I know one tip for me is if you have hypertension, take your blood pressure medication. Don't skip a day, take it. So that's one way that you can manage that chronic disease. Do you have one or two tips for individuals before we transition to Dr. Dye?
Last thing, and I know that this can be bothersome to other people, managing your diabetes and checking your diabetes if you have diabetes. Everybody who has diabetes isn't necessarily on a medication or insulin, but keeping your diabetes well managed is one of the things that prevents heart disease as well as vascular disease that may relate to the development of strokes, which causes cognitive dysfunction or brain dysfunction and memory loss.
Mm-hmm. Okay. All right. So I hope everyone took notes. There were a total of 4 slides. And again, we are recording this and we will share it, a link, as well as a PDF of the slides. So now let's transition to Dr. Dye, who's going to share information about just managing your household. What are the implications for you as a caregiver and as an individual financially while we're, in the throes of this pandemic? I mean, by the time a person of color reaches older age, they've experienced a lifetime of discrimination. And so right now, this pandemic has sort of exacerbated that issue. And so Dr. Dye today will be addressing that. Dr. Dye, and you need to unmute. Let's see. Okay, you're ready.
Okay. Thank you very much. Before I get started, if anybody knows where to find a good barber who has a mask and a pair of gloves, I wish you would refer him to me. I mean, he's got to have that mask and a pair of gloves, though. My wife won't let him in the house if he doesn't have a mask. Let me say that I'm very happy to talk about this because I think it's one of the issues that we sometimes overlook when we talk about managing the household. There's been a lot of talk recently about what social distancing mean and how we need to wash when we come in the house and all the things that we need to do to manage the internal environment of our home when people come in. But what I'm trying to talk about is how that responsibility continues to go on even more now during the pandemic in terms of the struggles that caregivers have. And it's seemingly more pressing for individuals in our minority communities and the minority caregiver in trying to deal with those issues. We all know the devastating impact the virus has had on the economy. We know about the increase in the number of unemployment claims that exist in most states. Unfortunately, many of the individuals that we are talking about work in those sectors of the economy that didn't pay the highest wages in the first place and certainly didn't provide, in some cases, even the benefits in terms of insurance. So this has been a devastating experience and is a devastating experience for people of color as we try to work our way through this this epidemic. It's kind of interesting. It reminds me sometimes of what my grandmother used to say. You know, no matter what happens, you know, black folk gonna always have more of it than anybody else unless it's money. And it's certainly true now because the types of benefits that are being provided and where the cuts seemingly are occurring are, I think, having a disproportionate impact on communities of color, not only in terms of healthcare, but in terms of all of the issues that we're dealing with. It only amplifies problems that were always there, and we're struggling with trying to overcome some of those issues, even on top of the problems that are being caused by the virus. The number of resources that generally were available in terms of what we call the safety net obviously have been impacted because of the way that the economy has been impacted and the things that are being done in terms of where funds are being redistributed. It's going to have a tremendous impact on our state and local governments. There are going to be a rash of layoffs and furloughs, even more than what we've already had. It's already occurring in some parts of our country, and over in up in Los Angeles, out in Los Angeles rather, in Michigan and other areas, and there's even discussions going on in the state of Georgia, where our governor is taking serious consideration for the kinds of cuts and furloughs that we're going to have to possibly experience here in Georgia as we try to fill the voids that have been created in our budget, in the state's budget. The other thing is that Dr. Parker talked about the pre-existing health conditions that put people of color at risk in terms of developing Alzheimer's and other neurodegenerative diseases. I'd like to also talk about the pre-existing economic conditions that put people of color even at more risk in terms of the kinds of financial struggles that we're having. And now we've already talked about some. Most of our people have been employed in a sector that did not pay the most attractive wages, obviously. We didn't have the opportunities to get the kind of health benefits that were available to other individuals. And we're having to struggle with that. And with the increasing layoffs that are going to occur, we're probably going to have a situation where those of us that were lucky enough to at least have some form of health insurance may lose it as a result of our those jobs going away. And naturally, the individuals that never got the insurance or got in that position will suffer even more. So the bottom line is that we have a long way to go. No one can really say how long this is going to last. The stimulus checks that have been distributed in our communities are naturally a good help. In some cases, they see it as a lifeline for many of our citizens. However, we know that because of the economic condition that existed prior to the virus, that in many cases that $1,200 is not going to go very far in terms of having the kind of impact that it needs to have on our being able to adjust or at least deal with the kind of crisis that we're dealing with economically. For example, most of the checks now, is my understanding, a lot of that money has been spent primarily on food and gas. And that's understandable when you consider the fact that food is one of the major things that we've had a basic need for, and it's also the kind of situation where we've always had to struggle with trying to find those food sources. The community food banks, which have been very popular in the community, have had their struggle in terms of being able to maintain the kind of supplies that they need, primarily because in many cases, they were receiving those food stocks from some of the major stores like Publix and others. And when those stores began to have problems with keeping food supplies again, they were not able to then pass that on to the community food banks. Fortunately, now that seems to be kind of rectifying itself. But in the situation that developed there, we did not have a valuable resource that had always been there for people in the community in order to meet the kind of needs that they have in terms of getting the food they need. Then, of course, when you look at the programs that are provided through your local government, state government, and I'm meaning primarily the food assistance program that we once called food stamps. It has a different name now, of course. I think it's SNAP. That has been a very worthwhile program over the years. But the problems that we sometimes have with that program now, that's still kind of in limbo, is that the Trump administration to date has not seen fit to remove the block that was placed on them, not on governors not having authority to waive the work requirement. In other words, people who are recipients who are on that program have to have a certain amount of time in which they will be looking for a job and get the job. Now, obviously, that's going to be even more of a problem now with the economy winding down and there not being enough jobs available for individuals to actually go out and find a job. That's one that we have to watch and one that we have to push for to see that the administration addresses that. Now, the bottom line, though, is that what do you do when you can't pay your bills? Because no matter what, the caregiver and everybody else in our community we have to begin to carry on in terms of meeting the obligations that we have and taking care of them. Well, there are resources that are available other than just what has been said about the stimulus check. There's been a lot of talk about it, but there are other resources that are available if we get into situations in running our homes where we can't, for example, pay the rent. There are services available and the time has been taken to get many of the landlords to begin to address this issue because of the impact that the virus has had. And in most cases, you can begin to then go and speak to them about the fact that you are laid off or you haven't had a job because of the virus. And they will make the kind of arrangement with you to work with the individual tenant to begin to have those particular services delayed in order to accommodate the needs of that family. But we shouldn't wait. We should call those landlords, your landlord, and speak about that and see if you cannot get some assistance and some support. The same thing applies when you're talking about delaying your mortgage. In most cases, if that mortgage is being backed by federal loans, federal support like Fannie Mae, et cetera, they have already worked out situations where they can give you forbearance in terms of working out that mortgage. You can begin to delay those payments for a certain period of time. You're still going to have to pay the money, but you certainly can begin to get some relief from not having to pay that rent, pay on that mortgage at the time that you would generally do in order to begin to find some relief until things begin to settle. So we would advise you to contact your mortgage company or your landlord in terms of rent to try to negotiate the kind of agreement that will assist and support you during this time until you're able to kind of get yourself balanced in terms of where we're going with the economy. Same thing applies to credit cards. Most of the credit cards like Capital One and the others have all agreed that they would not have those payments come in the way that they generally do, and that they are willing to work with you in order to be able to have those credit card payments delayed, et cetera, at least for now. And will not charge for this period of time, I think, the interest on those loans. So what I'm saying is that we should not wait. The same thing applies to student loans. I forgot to mention that. This CARES Act also makes provision for how students can begin to delay the payment on those student loans as well. Not saying that anybody's going to get out of not paying it, but my point is that there are bridges that have been built in order for you to be able to accommodate yourself in that situation. As I said, the key though is not to wait, which is what we do sometimes. If we don't have the money, then we, rather than calling the individual and working it out, we have a tendency not to to go into an avoidance mode and not call and try to negotiate what we're able to do. This is not a time to do that, because the longer you delay it, the more you're going to be in a position where you have to pay all that money back at one time. I want to say one more thing about the stimulus. The stimulus check and the unemployment benefits. We've been told, and it's now pretty much documented, that you will not have to pay the taxes on the $1,200 that you receive on your stimulus check. There initially was a lot of discussion about whether or not that actually had to be paid back. And my research has shown me that you do not. The $1,200 is not counted against your income, your taxable income, and so you will not have to do that. However, when you look at the unemployment benefits, your unemployment benefits, if you file for unemployment and you are granted those weeks in terms of being paid for when you're not working, you will have to pay taxes on that money. That will be treated with the 1099, and that will be filed at the time that you do your taxes next year. And that will be money that will be counted against your income. It's very important that you know that, because you have to plan now for the time when that would have to be a part of what you're doing as you prepare for your taxes. It's not free money. It is money that has been paid to you, but it's money that will be counted as your income along with anything else that you had done if you were working. That's a very important point, because it gets us to the point of having all kind of tax issues if we're not aware of that and if we don't do that. The other thing, and in closing, I'd like to say this. I think that there are a number of resources that there'll be a part of the resources the sheet that we send out to you. If you're interested in doing, for example, some form of financial planning, and I'm a very strong advocate for having that done. There are services that are available to you free to assist you in doing that. And I think now is the time for us to begin to do two things to address the pre-existing conditions that I said. The ones that Dr. Parker has said, certainly we as a community have to do it. There's a reason why every time something like this happens, we are impacted more, because we never address those pre-existing conditions. That makes us very high risk of all of the things that have been happening now as it relates to healthcare, as it relates to the bad experiences we're having with more of our people dying because of those pre-existing conditions. So we're at a stage now where it's not just something that you say you're going to do. I'm going to stop eating so much pork. I'm going to stop doing this or that. It's imperative that we do that. And that has to be a part of our financial plan, our long-range plan, as we move forward into the future. It has to be looked upon that way. The other thing is, when it comes to the financial issue, we need to begin to plan, particularly as caregivers, for those of us that are caring for people with Alzheimer's. We know that it's a continuously progressive downward disease. It's not going to get any better as things go along. As our loved ones enter into the different stages and the later stages, it will require more care and more money. And we need to begin to plan for that now. We need to do it now. We need to make the priority of the money that we do have, at least dedicating a portion of that to create at the least an emergency fund that's available at times like this that will assist us in that. We can't wait any longer not to have enough money or resources to address those issues that we know are going to come. We know they're coming. And even with the number of jobs that we don't have and the salaries that we don't make, and that's true, and that's not going to change overnight, we still can begin to find a small portion of the income that we do have to lay aside to plan for those times when we know these kind of crises will probably develop. That has to be done.
I
That is
agree.
the lifeline of how we move forward. Okay?
Dr.
Thank
Dye,
you. Mhm.
on that note, when you started talking about chronic diseases and other things, this is Monica Parker
Oh, hey,
speaking.
Monica.
Hi.
I know who that was. I'm sorry, go ahead.
I wanted to remind our listeners that if you are a caregiver and even if you are not, during this pandemic, should you get sick with COVID-19 or something else, please be sure to complete your Family Medical Leave Act document so that your work is there when you get ready to come back. Even though many of us have been made to shelter at home for this reason or that reason, if you've been diagnosed with an illness or you have something else going on, please be sure that you complete an FMLA document such that you have a job to return to. If you have COVID-19, if you've been affected by the coronavirus, different employees are going to be required to do different things to be able to come back to work. That's why I'm bringing this up. Everybody's employer is going to be different, but please complete a Family Medical Leave Act document if you or one of your family members certainly has been affected with the coronavirus. But more importantly, if you are a caregiver for somebody with dementia, you need to complete an FMLA document that allows you to take time off so that you can care for your relative.
Great. We're
Thank
going
you,
to
Dr.
get,
Parker.
oh, go ahead, Kitty. I'm sorry. No, I was just
Uh,
going to say that that would be a resource with the National Credit Counseling or the National Credit Counseling Agency that can assist at a time like this with these kind of issues that we're talking about. There's also a nonprofit that's called the XY Planning Network that provides free long-range planning or financial planning to anyone that's interested in having that done. And it's done virtually, so it can be done from anywhere in the country. That's something that our community should check out to see what's available, and they can assist in getting the kinds of things in place that will help you to develop that kind of financial planning that I talked about. Dr. Parker has been doing a lot, even up to now, in most of our training that deals with individuals getting the legal documents in place for when that happens. But I'm talking about now, how can we begin to partner that with developing the financial plans that move us forward on a day-to-day basis. Thank you.
Excellent. Excellent information. Again, my take home was don't wait.
Exactly.
And Dr. Wren also mentioned utilities. And one thing I want to mention is if you had the liberty to indulge in lots of subscriptions like Netflix and Hulu and all these things we get bombarded with, this is a good time to just sort of reevaluate and take an inventory and an audit of, what things have you committed to and what things you can really just take off, that right now were probably a luxury for you before, but now we really want to be conservative. And so don't hesitate, even if you did pay your rent, your mortgage, make the call and just to assess and find out what is available just in case. You don't want to be in a crisis. Okay.
Yeah, one more thing, Cornelia. Now's a good time to renegotiate that contract you have for your internet service,
Yes.
because many of them now are looking for,
Yeah, they don't want to lose customers.
don't want to
And
lose it. So
yeah,
now's the time for you to call them and let them know that they either do something about your contract or you're going to walk. Okay?
yeah, right. I
Okay.
agree. Okay, so we have addressed your physical and cognitive health. We've talked about financial health. Now we're going to talk about your mental health. We're right in the thick of a pandemic. And again, we're talking about racial inequalities, and we know mental health is a big thing when it comes to people of color. So I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Glenda Wren, who is going to share with us for 10 minutes about mental health maintenance. Dr. Wren?
Thank you. You can go ahead and advance to the next slide. So the reality of the situation that we're all in is that it has posed a threat to mental health for all of us. No one is without mental health. We all wake up with some degree of mental health, different levels on different days, but we're really all at risk. And for caregivers of people with dementia, oftentimes they are functioning at baseline as a wounded healer. We know this from studies that have shown that primary caregivers of dementia patients at baseline have a 50% risk of developing clinical depression. And if that loved one has agitation or psychosis as part of their symptomatology, that can add to caregiver stress, can lead to institutionalization. And the pandemic stress that we're all exposed to is happening on top of that baseline stress. So they're a particular high-risk group. But even those of us, like the panelists and myself, that have, no active mental health issues, or you may not even have a prior mental health history, we're all dealing with additional stresses, new stress exposures, whether that's a job loss or job insecurity, or just the stress of social distancing and physical distancing and how that has constrained your options, may be wearing you out, making you feel weary and tired. And the fact that this is an indefinite uncertainty is particularly stressful. So I'm going to talk about some of the unique stresses that we're facing with coronavirus, as well as what you can do about that to try to strengthen your mental health. Next slide, please. So can you advance that for me? Thanks. So, okay, you went the other way. There we go. There are unique challenges amid coronavirus. The first is increased isolation. Now, obviously, this is being done intentionally for health reasons, but it is involuntary. So you're talking about a group of risk people, caregivers, and people with dementia that may already have some degree of isolation because of the demands of their caregiving and work, but now you have increased isolation where friends can't come over and visit, you can't go out to use, some of the strategies that you used to just get away aren't available. You can't get your massage anymore, can't go get your hair done, your nails done. So there's an increased isolation stress. And then there's difficulty accessing the supports and services. I mentioned friends and family, but even some health services, you see that the healthcare system is under such strain that most ambulatory, outpatient, primary care settings are all telehealth and telesupport. And that is wonderful that there's still care being provided, but it also can be limiting. Some people have had difficulty accessing the video technology for telehealth visits, and we've used telephone as a way to overcome that. But people are also scared, and they may be reluctant to actually reach out for help. And that poses a unique challenge where people are kind of trying to make do by themselves when they really need to get that additional support. And then living under this constrainment of choice is stressful to your mental well-being, even if you're not aware of it on the day-to-day. Just knowing that you can't get out, that you can't do the things that you might like to do, it wears on you. It's a burden that we carry. We talked already a lot about financial insecurity. That's also mentally stressful, not knowing how you're going to pay your rent, not knowing how long your utilities will stay on. And again, this is if you're a caregiver, you have some degree of chronic stress. This is an acute stressor on top of that, that also kind of feels chronic because it's been about 5-6 weeks now that we've been living in this environment. And it is probably starting to wear you out. I know that it's something that we've had a lot of conversations in professional circles and personal circles where we're starting to really see the impact of this in terms of mental health. And in a sense, there is a grief and a loss that's happening, a loss of norms. Some people have been personally impacted by the virus and have loved ones that have died. They've not been able to properly grieve them because they've been in isolation. this is really significant, and the way that you might usually cope with that, you can't go to church anymore and hug your neighbor, you're having virtual church services. This is all pretty significant in terms of how this layers on in the stress there. And then the day-to-day stress of just managing infection risk. You're probably in a family that some people are really strict and other people are kind of, loosey-goosey about it. And that can be really stressful, not knowing, are you introducing risk, actual health, physical risk into your home? And if you're caring for a loved one that has chronic health conditions, then that's something else to manage. So let's go to the next slide and talk a little bit about what can you do? How can you cope? The first thing that's important to note is that things aren't normal. So you need to adjust your own expectations of yourself and of others. So the fact that you might be a little bit more tired when you wake up in the morning, or if you get partway through the day and you need a nap and you're not usually a person that needs to nap, that is expected. Maybe you can't stay on top of your chores the way that you used to. Understanding that things aren't normal, even though it may not be apparent to you on the day-to-day, can help you to just have that heightened level of awareness that, yes, this is stressful. Let me acknowledge that. And putting a name to it and acknowledging it and talking about it is often the first step of getting help. One of the things we know from a wide body of research is the benefits to your psychological health of practicing gratitude. Gratitude is not just, I'm thankful for the day, general. It's really about having intentional, specific times of reflection where you're hunting for the good stuff. In our family, we've had a routine at the end of each day that everyone goes around and shares, what are 3 good things that happened today? And we share them and we talk about them and we talk about how you can have more of that good thing happen to you. And it may be something as simple as, I went to the store and they had toilet paper there. I mean, it doesn't have to be a big thing like you got a big paycheck. You really can be grateful for the small things. I got a chance to talk to my family member that I hadn't heard from. And then acknowledging that, reflecting on that has shown to really improve your mental health, and it also helps to balance out the negative exposures. It is important to monitor your mood, to be aware of how you're doing. I recommend at least a daily check-in with yourself on how you're doing and what do you need. And identifying red flags. If you're waking up and you're feeling like you just don't have any energy at all, that you're not excited about anything, you don't have anything to look forward to, you're starting to feel hopeless. Those are some red flags that you really need to get help if that's what you're experiencing. The other proactive thing that you can do is limiting your negative exposure. You don't need to have the news on 24/7. The news is not really changing that rapidly. You can have set times that you check in with that. Even some conversations, I have, my work requires me to talk about the virus regularly, and I really kind of seek out conversations that are on a totally different topic. And sometimes you can kind of get into a frenzy, especially on social media, where everyone wants to talk about things. And that also is a negative exposure that if you're not aware of it, it can start to wear down your mental health. And then in terms of just the fundamentals, be intentional about your basic needs. Move, sleep, eat, and connect every day if you can do those things. It can be a 10-minute walk that you do up and down your street. Walk inside your house if you don't feel safe going outside. We've already talked about the importance to your brain of sleep, and because of the increased anxiety, many people have seen their sleep impacted by this. Focus on what you can control. There's a lot that you can't control, but there's a lot that you can control, and try to introduce some variety into your life in the small ways. Learn to cook a new recipe or something like that. But in all of this, the key message is really be generous with self-compassion towards yourself. Take it easy on yourself. Don't put unrealistic expectations on yourself, and try to connect with others for that validation. And if you do experience some of those red flags, seek professional help. I do have the next slide that has some resources on there for you. I won't go over them in detail today. I'll make sure that we make them available to you in the slides for how you can get professional help, as well as if you want to read more about other psychological wellness tips. So I'll stop there so that we have time for our next presenter. And if you have other questions, feel free to post them in the comments.
Thank you, Dr. Wren. So what I heard is adjust your expectations and give yourself some grace. You know, don't put yourself on the hook right now. And the daily check-ins, and then monitor your mood. So again, thank you. That was amazing. I see a couple of comments in the chat. We are now going to go to our last speaker, and then hopefully we will have time for some Q&A. Alice Mullins, give me just a sec to pull up your slide, is going to be giving us again some, she's going to reinforce some of those practical steps that we need to begin to implement while we are sheltering at home. So I'm pulling that up right here. Thank you guys for being patient. Thank you everyone for tuning in, and we're gonna get started here in just a second. All right, there we go.
Okay, thank you. Dr. Wren, that was great what you shared, and I just want to highlight some of the things, and I put kind of an acronym down for our caregivers to make it kind of easy to do some of these practicals. S stands for support and social engagement, just really connecting with others. We are meant to connect to help us to understand that we're not alone in this as a caregiver. Sometimes I know that's how people feel, because especially at this time when they're so isolated. E for education and expectations, and educating about actually the disease process that your loved one may be experiencing, because sometimes there's so many different caregivers, I know, different stages that you may be in terms of caregiving, and not knowing what your loved one is going through, but getting some education and managing the expectations of saying, yes, this is something that's expected in terms of behavior of what your loved one is going through. It really helps to ease kind of your mind of what's going on. Laughter, that's just simple. We've got to find joy. We've got to find something during the day that helps to pick up our spirits. Faith, just that is something where we need to understand you use your faith at this time to rekindle your sense of hope in yourself, in others, and in the future. C stands for compassion for self, which was talked about, and understanding that you need to pay attention when we are, sometimes we're our worst critics, and you're doing the best that you can, and we have to learn to have compassion for self. A is for activities. I know at this time, finding what can I do when I am in the house and I'm caring for my loved one. How can you expect me to be active? What I can do is do my chores. What are you expecting? And so I'm gonna kind of give some practicals about that, but we need to be active. We need to move, we need to go, we need to figure out some things that help us to stay engaged. R stands for rest and routine. So we talked about sleep. You need to have some good sleep hygiene. Understanding that you need to rejuvenate yourself. That's what rest does. That's what sleep does. But also routine. Caring for someone who has Alzheimer's, a lot of times they need the routine, the structure. And when they have that routine and you have that routine, then your day may go a lot easier. You'll understand what to expect, and you'll be able to put some structure to your day. And then E, as it's been discussed with all the panelists, is exercise. Understanding again how it affects you, your brain health, and also just getting you up and going again, being engaged. You can go to the next slide. Okay, so here are my practicals. And the first one for the support is going to a virtual support group for caregivers. So with a virtual support group, and what I'm understanding is a lot of people I know are saying, I don't want to do anything new. I don't want to put anything on my computer. I don't know how to do it. I am illiterate when it comes to trying to put something on the screen. And what I'm going to share with you is that my mom is 83 years old, and she lives in California. And she had that kind of thinking, but I'm like, during this time of COVID, I need to see her. I need to lay eyes on hers, and I need to connect. And so I talked her through, and she got Skype on her computer. So it can happen. If my 83-year-old mother who lives alone in a house in California can do it, I know you guys can do it. It's finding maybe someone that you know, a grandchild, a child, a friend who can just help you walk through that, because you need the support to connect with other people. Video chatting with friends. Also, I want to talk about the helplines. You know, there's the mental health lines to get some help in terms of your coping strategies. Maybe you're feeling the depression or you're feeling anxiety. But also, there's 1-800 numbers for the Alzheimer's Association, because sometimes things are going on with your loved one and you just need to talk about it and find out again, is it okay? And that's flows into the E in terms of education, getting education through the Alzheimer's Association. Also, Teepa Snow, she has a positive approach to care so that you can feel equipped. When you feel equipped, you will feel better as you're taking care of your loved one. L for laughter. Watching an old comedy. Do something. Listen to a podcast. Look at old pictures. You know that there are pictures that you had of when you were younger that you're thinking, what was I wearing at that time? What was I thinking? Or what was somebody else wearing? Putting that into your life, having some of that laughter come in to help your mood. Faith, watching services online, listening to inspirational music, meditation, being able to, again, pull that to you, have that foundation that you had before. I'm not telling you anything new. I'm just kind of reinforcing. If you have that faith belief system, hold on to that, utilize that, and understand that that's such a powerful thing to help you with regard to your mental health and carrying you through. C, for the compassion, practicing forgiveness of yourself. Again, like Dr. Wren talked about, expressing gratitude and how it's more than just saying, oh, I'm thankful for this, but really focusing on and reflecting on the small things and what you appreciate about where you are and what you've been given and the blessings that you do have. Activities. So here's where we get into, you know, you can't go out, you can't do anything. They have virtual museum tours right now online. You can visit the Louvre in Paris. You can visit the Georgia Aquarium from the seat of from your chair in your home. And they have webcams where everything is going on right now in the aquarium. They have virtual concerts that you can see via Zoom. So there are activities that you can engage in that aren't going to cost you any money. It's just you turning on your computer and getting those links to accessing those. Resting, like I said, practicing that good sleep hygiene, making sure that it's restorative sleep. And again, that structure during the day. But be flexible. When I say routine and structure, you know, your person living with Alzheimer's, they may be at a place where they don't always want that structure and routine. And so you have to be flexible and understand also where they are so that, that you're able to manage and deal with your day. And E, exercising. And like Dr. Wren said about maybe you don't feel comfortable going out to take a walk right now. And I understand that. COVID-19 is very real, but you can do virtual exercises in the home. You don't have to have a gym to go to. You don't have to have weights or the perfect setting. There are classes that they give where you can do yoga now. You can do chair exercises on YouTube. There are so many different ways to be able to connect and see structure with regard to exercise. So I just want to leave you with the fact that you can emerge from this resilient. You can confront and handle this stressful event and grow and thrive in this challenging situation. You have been doing this as caregivers, you know, for I don't know how long, but just being resilient as a people for I don't know how long. And so I just want to encourage you that you can still make the most of this time and thrive, and that there is support out there for you. Thank you.
Thank you, Alice. Wow. Okay. I love the acronym. It was very practical, and I think it would be a great reference point as individuals go back and look at the resources that we're going to share. I do want to thank everyone for coming. We'll take 2 minutes before we close out. If you want to, you had a burning question, this is your time to ask our panel of experts. One thing I want to mention is, we are having these very, informative and educational sessions every week. One thing that we are considering is having a social hour where, we may give you like a top 10 things you should be doing and cover that for maybe 10 minutes. And then we'll have an exercise demonstration. And then we'll let all the videos come up and we'll just let people share and talk and just have a dialogue. So that's something that we're considering. We're just sort of trying to figure it out. We may even have a comedian come on and give us some very appropriate jokes, because we want to remain connected with our audience and our adults. And so everything doesn't always have to be informational and educational. Laughter is medicine, as you have heard today. So I saw a couple of things in the chat. This is your turn, and then we're going to close out and thank you all. Every Tuesday we host Brain Talk Live. And then Dr. Parker, you can advise on how often you want to have our minority segment. But let's see, I see that, okay, that was someone just thanking us. How soon should we look to get the email with the slides and recordings? It takes a little bit of time, like not to convert the PDF, but to get the recording downloaded. So I try to turn that around within 24 hours. So if you'll just be patient with us, I try to get that out within 24 hours. The other consideration is if you have Facebook, please go to our Facebook page. That's where you will see earlier episodes that we've posted. And then you can always go to our website, alzheimers.emory.edu. You can also email us if you think you got left off the email and what have you, or you might have transposed some letters in your email. Okay, questions. I see a lot of thank yous. Okay, okay.
Cornelia?
Yes.
How often should we have a minority talk?
Yeah.
How often does this audience want to have a talk? At least once a month? What do you want to do? It's hard for us to come up with what you want. We're here to serve you. So let us know.
Okay, the practicals are a great refrigerator visual. Thank you. Okay, someone is looking for an African-American therapist who is taking new patients. Okay, we might have to do a little research and perhaps send that reference in the resources. Does anyone have any insight? And I'll unmute everyone.
This is Dr. Parker. Keep in mind that new patient visits in the era of COVID is going to be a little bit different from the way it was in January or February. Most providers are not having in-person, face-to-face visits. That being said, each provider is going to have a little different system. So we'll try to come up with some resources where you may go seek a new appointment, but it's not going to be business as usual the way we did it before. Dr. Wren, can you help with that one?
Yes, I could do some research and ask some of my colleagues. I do know that at the Grady primary care clinics, all of their patients have access to behavioral health support, including short-term therapy as well as medication support. Many of those providers are also minority providers, but I will also get a list of some private options and then I'll email them to you and we can send them out to the participant.
Okay, great. And another thing that came up, I mean, we are talking about Alzheimer's. Alzheimer's affects older adults. A resounding theme that I've heard, and people keep asking for, what about the younger demographic? What about, how do I get them engaged? They need the same information. I would just encourage you to invite them. I think when people think, oh, older adults, that doesn't apply to me, but we're all hoping to grow old. And so the earlier we start doing, primary prevention, the healthier we will be. So if any of our panelists want to add to that, people are asking, like, how can I engage Generation X, Generation Z, our post baby boomer audience? They want them engaged as well.
There is a question in the chat with respect to, and there are several resources that are coming up with telemedicine health in the chat box. That's good. For those people who have clinical questions about their relatives' symptoms and how to recognize, I would really defer that to a specific provider. Different people accept things differently. And if your mother is walking around and it's obvious that she's had a stroke and you don't seem to want to acknowledge that, there's not a whole lot that I can do to help that person. I think that families need to go with their affected family members to the doctor to get the information that they need and to ask the right questions. It's hard to ask questions and to address something if you're not looking at it, directly involved with it. So make an appointment with your relative to go to the medical provider of choice to have these discussions.
Okay. All right. Well, with that said, thank you to all of our panelists. Thank you, everyone, for tuning in, and look for an email with the resources that we referenced today. And we would give everybody a round of applause if we were in person.
Yeah, we were.
So we're meeting
biggie.
virtually. So thank you all, and we look forward to seeing you soon. Have a great day.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.